3, 2, 1.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We're delighted to see so many of you have signed up. And Ngotsi, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you. Thank you. Sorry, you will not believe. Are we on?
We're on.
Yes, we are on.
Sorry.
You were perfect timing.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
I was signing the books.
Ready to sit in the lobby. Well, I can't tell you how delighted I am to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
So,
sorry to be a bit late.
You're not actually late at all. You're right on time. Welcome everybody to this webinar. Those of you who are just joining, we're here to discuss this fantastic book and the subject of women's leadership with two inspiring global women leaders who have got a lot to teach us all. I understand Ngotsi has been busy signing the book to sell in the lobby. Unfortunately, we don't have a lobby today, but the book is available from all good bookshops. I'd like to start by welcoming our chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at King's College London. As you all know, she's the first and only woman to have served as Prime Minister of Australia. And together with Ngotsi, have written this wonderful book that I also have here, if you would like to rush out and go online and buy it. And Julia will be in conversation with her co-author Ngotsi Okonjo-Iweala, who is a famous development economist, former finance minister of Nigeria, and board chair of Gavi, the Vaccination Alliance, since 2016, as well as lots of other things going on right now, I understand, in Ngotsi. So let's make a start. Perhaps we could start by, the two of you could tell us all what inspired you to get together and write this book.
Well, Julia, why don't you kick off?
Okay, I'll kick off. We first met each other when I was Prime Minister and we hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting here in Australia. But we really got to know each other in the years since. I've been chairing the Global Partnership for Education and Ngozi has her Vaccine Alliance work, and we served together on an education commission. And I think both of us, in our own ways, were still thinking through some of the things that happened to us during politics as women. And we were watching the experiences of women around the world. And on the sidelines of all of these international meetings we were going to, we started to compare notes about what was happening for women leaders and the fact that no matter the country, no matter where we were talking in the world, every woman leader seemed to be hitting comparable kinds of issues. And then, of course, Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, and that put some more urgency into our conversations. And so we started discussing, could we make a contribution to analysing what's happening with women and leadership, and perhaps sharing some insights about how to make a difference for women who aspire to leadership. So that was the motivation for the book from my point of view.
Well, you know, just to follow on Julia and add a little bit more, you know, we looked at our own experiences and initially, you know, thought about just writing about our experiences because both of them are quite rich. But like Julia said, as we moved along, we thought that, wow, all these women are experiencing problems, women leaders. And I think we thought it would enrich the experience, allow us to test some hypotheses about women's leadership, enable us to pull together a series of observations and experiences that might be useful to other women and to younger women, and to men, you know. So that was the inspiration for that. And finally, let me just add that it was a bit of self-defense, I think, on my part and hers, because a lot of people ask to be mentored. And I already have like 10 people I'm mentoring, and you feel this guilt about not being able to mentor more people. So at least from that perspective, if we could put down some of what we had learned, it could serve as a kind of contribution to mentorship.
One of the things I really love about the book It's the way you combine, and when we have an economist and a lawyer, you've combined that brain power with the hypothesis testing approach that you've just described, Ngozi, with the compassion that you've both brought to your leadership roles, by thinking about real lives and real stories and how to relate to people. And that's a really unusual mix, I think, to have the cutting edge research alongside lived experience. As you were consuming all this research, did it shed any light on your own experiences as you went along that you wouldn't have thought of at the time? We start with you this time, Ngozi, and then back to Julia.
Yes, in many ways. I think Julia will speak to this, but as you go into the research, I think what strikes you again is, in spite of all the progress that has been made in many years, when you really look at the numbers, and I'm sure Julia will quote them all for you, in terms of women's leadership all over the world, in politics, but even outside of politics, in business. We know some numbers about, in business, 5% of CEOs in the Fortune 500, I think only 5% of them are women. And, you can go on and on with these statistics. So it strikes you how, in spite of progress, there's still such a long way to go. So that's one thing that comes out, and that it might take hundreds of years for us to make our impact in so many areas. So that was one interesting thing.
Julia, what's your response?
Well, I think at this stage, Rosie, we should both probably acknowledge that this is a much better book because of the work of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. And I think both of us would want to thank you and thank Laura, one of our researchers, for reading the manuscript and helping correct us a little bit on bits of the research. I think the things that I've got to do with you and the team have helped me to absorb the research so much more. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's a stronger book because of the combination of the two of us as co-authors, but it's also a stronger book because of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. So thank you.
Thank you.
Laura's listening too, she'll be delighted.
One of the things that really struck me when I looked at the research is there's this research from Yale where they got groups of voters and got a man and a woman to pitch to these two separate groups of voters as if they were seeking political office. They were in fact actors, but they were, pretending that they were trying to be elected into political office. And they gave the man and the woman exactly the same script. So they delivered the same lines in looking for votes. And what was clear from that is if a woman was seen to be ambitious, power-seeking, then that was very adversely reacted to by the audience. There was a sort of visceral, no, she's not a nice woman, she's not the sort of person that I want to support. Whereas a man could deliver exactly the same lines and it was fine. And looking back on my political career, obviously I came to leadership as Prime Minister through a party room ballot. That was unexpected. People weren't thinking that that was going to happen. And so that frame about being an ambitious woman was around me from the outset of my leadership. And it's helped me reflect back on that and how much that then carried through and how much of that was gendered. And I kind of intuitively felt it at the time, but it's been really interesting for me to dig into the research and to see that in a sort of credentialed and evidenced way.
And that's something that comes across, I think, for both of you, that you have lived your own experiences and then through your conversations with the women that you interview for the book, sometimes see parallels in your lives that you might not have anticipated. Can you think of an example of that you might like to share with us all?
Let's talk. One of the things we look at is, there's a chapter called It's All About the Hair. And that is arises out of part of it, Hillary Clinton sharing with us that she calculated the number of hours she spent worrying and doing her hair, and it could total up to a month, during her time as Secretary of State. That's a considerable amount of time. And, people focus so much on her hair and her hairstyle and that this whole issue about appearance of women, and sometimes the substance of what they're saying not being listened to because people are busy looking at what they look like. I think this is a common experience that doesn't happen to men. And Julia puts it by saying, men have a suit. They wear their shirt and tie, and people are used to that. They don't criticize it. But as a woman, you'll find this criticism as a woman leader. And I'm sure for women who are in senior management positions, the same thing. So we could all relate to that. And the women we found, they dealt with it in different ways. I dealt with it in my way. And Hillary said to me that she envied me because I didn't have to worry about my hair, because my hair is always tied in with my African style. And I evolved that indeed to give myself a certain look. I didn't have to worry once I got into that look, and people will get used to it and focus on the substance of what I had to say.
Julia?
Yeah, it was interesting, that issue about appearance. All of the 8 women we interviewed, even though they came from very different cultures and contexts, had to think about their appearance, and it was clearly an element of how they were received by the voting public. For me, one of the things that really resonated actually involved Theresa May. We interviewed 8 women in total, and we write a chapter that we entitle Who's Minding the Kids? And we talk about work and family life experience for these political leaders. And obviously the leader at the forefront of that is Jacinda Ardern, who's the second woman in history to have a baby while serving as a national political leader. The first was Benazir Bhutto quite a number of years ago in Pakistan. And so we've talked to women about how they balance those things. But of the women we talked to, Theresa May doesn't have children. I don't have children. It's well known, and Theresa May's spoken about this publicly, that she and her husband would have very much liked to have had children, but it wasn't possible. And so we got to do a parallel and reflect on how people see childlessness and the different ways they see it. If it's been seen to be made as a choice by a woman, I made it as a choice, as opposed to one that was imposed, as it was imposed on Theresa, and the way that played out in political careers. And so we do try and unpack some of that in the book, not just the struggle juggle of work and family life, but also how we frame choices about having children and women, and how that can limit how we're prepared to see women leaders who have made a choice not to have children.
That's a really interesting point. And if I remember rightly, when Theresa May made that very personal comment publicly about her childlessness, it was in response to some criticisms of her not being able to relate to people because she wasn't a mother. And so in a way, she was kind of publicly outed into something that was a very private matter. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was actually a woman, another woman candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party, who was making these claims. And you have got a chapter about women who don't help other women and where they should end up. I mean, would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Go on, Julia, you go.
we were channeling our inner Madeleine Albright. I think everybody should have an inner Madeleine Albright. And of course, Madeleine Albright is famous for the saying that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And so we, in writing the book, asked ourselves the question, are we going to that special place in hell? How crowded is that special place in hell going to be? Is everybody we know going to be down there as well? And we looked at the research, which gave us some comfort in some ways. There's an image, I think, particularly in the corporate world, of the sort of Queen Bee, who is the woman who breaks through. She becomes the first woman on the corporate board or the first woman in senior management ranks. And often the perception is that those first women then pull the drawbridge up and don't help other women come through because they like the status of being the only woman. But the research actually tells you that it's not so much the attitude of the one woman that prevents other women coming through. It's the attitude of chairs of the board and CEOs who say to themselves, oh, that gender thing, we fixed that. We've got a woman, we don't need another one, that's done. So more the male power structure was imposing that. But we did dig beyond the research into what we ultimately ended up calling the politics of scarcity. And I do think that this impacts on women's behaviours towards each other, and it's something for us all to think about. I think because we've been in a context for so long where of power structures, whether they're political cabinets or corporate boards or judicial benches or whatever, women have had the smallest slice. It's quite easy to succumb to the notion that your competitor is not everybody on that, body. If you want a place on that committee or board, your competitor isn't the whole lot. Your competitors are the other women. And for women to therefore fall into the trap of not showing sufficient solidarity with the other women. And so we do encourage women when they read this book to, not that women won't ever be in competition with other women, that will happen, but when competitions are really playing off this politics of scarcity, to ask yourself the next question, which is, should I really be having a combative relationship with this other woman, or should we be combining and changing the rules of this game so women get a fairer share?
Let me add to something to that. Another aspect of this was also, as women, was it the experience of these women that they climbed up to the leadership ladder where they were with the help of other women? Or was it men who mentored them? Because there's a tendency when we're looking for mentors to look for mentors of our own sex as well. So young women are looking for younger women and to mentor them. But we found a varied experience. There were women who helped women along the way and made it possible, but there were also men. And this is also something we encourage when it comes to mentorship. Reach out. It's not just relying on female mentors if you're a younger woman, but look for those males. They are part of the equation. Women tend to talk to each other, to female audiences, but we can't really solve a lot of these problems unless we include men in the equation. And so that's another thing, that there were many like me who were also really helped by male mentors.
That's such an important point and something that comes across very strongly. And I do hope we've got lots of men in the audience today who are supporters of gender equality. Can I take you back to some of the stories that were relayed to you as you spoke to the different women you interviewed? Could each of you tell us what you heard that most surprised you, that you wouldn't have expected?
Well, I'm happy to start. I suppose we should give people just a flavour of the range of women we interviewed. We interviewed 8 women leaders from around the world. We decided to select all of those women from the world of politics, not because we think the book is just about politics, but we thought that the spotlight on women in politics is the whitest and the hottest. So what we could learn from their experience would probably be at that very stark end, and then we could build from that for lessons for women more broadly. And so we interviewed women who either were or are serving as national leaders. So Theresa May, obviously United Kingdom, Erna Solberg, who is the Prime Minister of Norway, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, then Michelle Bachelet, who was President of Chile twice, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was the first woman to lead a nation in Africa. She was President of Liberia. Joyce Banda, who was the second woman to lead a nation in Africa, President of Malawi. And then we added Hillary Clinton because we thought, you know, even though she didn't get there, her experience was a very telling and powerful one, and certainly an example that the world watched. And we added Christine Lagarde because at that stage she was still with the International Monetary Fund, now with the European Central Bank. She'd been in French politics before that. And of course the IMF is received at international meetings, the leader of the IMF as having the same status as the head of government. So she had corporate experience from her days at Baker and McKenzie, a law firm globally. She had experience in the French system and this international experience. So that was the range of women. In terms of, you know, unexpected moments, we had many of them. I think the one that will stay with me is when the two of us journeyed to Brussels to interview Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, who was there for a meeting with the European Union. And when we first walked in to see her, we both met her before. She's been a great champion of girls' education, particularly globally. But when we walked in to see her, the first thing she said was, my media advisor had to explain to me what resting bitch face is. And now I'm trying to smile more so people will think that I'm always happy. And so we thought, this is a pretty good place to start for a discussion on women and leadership.
Oh dear.
Yeah. No, I was going to add that for me, I think one thing that a kind of thread that ran through all the experiences, as varied as they are, that kind of was interesting to me. I don't know if the word surprise will work, but interesting is the fact that in growing up, none of these leaders felt that in their childhood, they were being held back by being told by their parents that they couldn't achieve the same as boys. In other words, you know, the expectations of them were the same, and many of them had brothers or siblings. Their parents had the same expectations of them to perform as they had of their brothers. And I think that really resonated with me as well, because in my family, my father and my mother expected, I actually used to joke that they expected more from my sister and me than from our brothers. So there was this, you know, I think nurturing environment in which all these women grew up, where they were given the freedom, you know, and the support to be who they could be. And they were not held back.
That came across as so important, and I think something that you have in common, Julia.
Absolutely. I mean, it was really interesting that, you know, from such different backgrounds, such incredibly different backgrounds. I mean, obviously, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Joyce Banda can talk about growing up in their nations, some real experiences with poverty, with not having opportunities. Both of them survived early marriages, which were abusive, you know, so women coming from backgrounds that, you know, are very different to my own. And yet they said, even as they went through those experiences, that the immediate environment around them was one where they were taught to look for opportunity. They were never told, you know, leadership is for the boys, that's not for you. So very interesting to see that set of experiences being right across this group of women leaders from such different cultures and contexts. And we did drill a little bit into what does that mean that we can do for the next generation, for the kids of today. And Rosie, you're the mother of girls, so you've probably got a very thought through view about this. But one of the things we thought is, apart from replicating that environment of opportunity and talking to girls about aiming high and aspiring for themselves, that even when you're doing that within the family home, influences from our culture can creep in from outside. We recount in the book an experience I had. I think I was at an airport watching a mother who was losing the argument with her very young daughter, 4 or 5-year-old daughter, about whether pink was for girls. And this desperate mother sort of saying, "But Daddy's got a pink shirt," as this girl was just implacably replying, "No, pink's for girls." And you could just see in front of your eyes, there's no way that that young girl was taught that in her family home. She's picked that up somewhere else, and just how pernicious those influences are. And so we go to the stage of saying, it's a good thing to be having open conversations with kids about this. So things that they've picked up, which they might take on board as limiting what they can do in their own lives, can be talked through early, because it's obviously not just parents who get to set what the norms are and what the expectations are for girls.
May I come back to a point, Rosie, that I want to raise? I should have talked about it. When Julia talked about the issue of choice, of having children or not having children and what that meant. I think many of the things that young women often ask about is, how do you balance this family and work? And I think one of the most interesting things I think people will see in the book, that Jacinda, who is, as Julia said, second female to have a child in office, when you ask her that, she says, "I just make it work." Those are her words. So this issue of balancing, it's not about balancing, it's about making it work from day to day. And I think that's a good lesson. There's no perfect answer for young women or men who are seeking about how they manage this work-life balance. You make it work and you move along the way. And that's very important, I think, experience.
Incredibly important. And so I've asked you what surprised you. What moved you the most? Because I know there are some very touching, poignant points in the book. So are there any sort of particular revelations that really moved you?
I was very moved talking to both Michelle Bachelet and to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to just go through some of the incredible experiences they've lived through to get to their moment of leadership. Michelle Bachelet was the daughter of a general and lived, what would have been a pretty charmed life up until the moment of the military dictatorship there with Pinochet, when her father was then imprisoned and tortured until his heart gave out. She and her mother were both imprisoned and tortured. She fled to Australia as the first place of exile, and then was exiled from her country for many years before it was safe to return. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf talked about her father was an important man in Liberian politics, but he died when she was quite young, and how her family moved from being a noted and much visited family to a family that was dealing with real poverty. And then she herself married young. An opportunity for education came. It was only going to come once for her to go to the United States and to study at university. And so she took that opportunity, but taking it meant that she left her children in the care of her grandparents, including her youngest child, who at that stage was just a 1-year-old, and how even all these years later, she lives with a sense of guilt about having done that. And so how tough choices can be for women and how bravely they have to make them. I found that incredibly moving. And whilst, we've got experiences, I've got experiences to tell about gender in Australian politics, I've obviously never faced choices as harsh as the ones that these women leaders lived through and are able to talk about, and did talk about just so honestly to us in the book. I mean, the degree of access that we had and how, forthright these women were with us was truly incredible.
Really inspiring moments. What about yourself, Ngotsi?
Yeah, well, this story about Ellen is really moving. But one aspect of it is when her father died and, her mother had to struggle to bring up the children alone and how that shaped her. But Christine Lagarde went through the same thing, where her father also died when she was young. And she was the first of, I think, four, had 2 or 3 other brothers. And how when she saw how her mother had to take over the household and how she herself came into responsibilities, that really shaped who she was and from earlier on. And I think that's striking. But another moment is from Joyce Banda. I was really moved by what she went through when her president died and she was vice president. And there was a struggle almost for power in which she almost ended up not being sworn in constitutionally as she should have been, because there was a struggle by another, set to take over power. And how she told us this anecdote of her husband calling, the chief of the army and he coming. And then once the ministers knew that the army chief was with them, they all rushed over, almost scrambling over themselves to come and surround her. And then she was able to give the speech. It's just that whole thing of being prevented, to take on what should rightfully be your normal next step. So that was a very interesting and moving story as well.
Thank you so much for sharing those. The last question from me before we get to some pre-submitted questions from the audience is, if you'd had this book in your satchel before you embarked on your careers, what might you have done differently if you had this knowledge earlier?
I'll go first. In the book, we talk about something called the glass cliff, which is when women brought in or put in a position where things are really, really difficult. They always seem to be the ones that take over and end up cleaning up the difficult situation there is. There's Christine Lagarde when she went took over the Baker McKinsey management at a very tough moment. And, I wish I'd known about this glass cliff when I was going through my career, because not that it would have changed anything, but it would have made me feel much better that this was not a strange experience. Because I had a couple of glass cliff moments in my career when I took on or was put into situations that were really tough. And it was kind of make or break. If I managed to get through, it would be fine. And I did get through and got a promotion or got lauded. But if you failed, it could be the end of your career. And if had I had this book, I would have at least known about this phenomenon and been able to get through it better.
And I think a couple of things would have stayed with me if I'd had the opportunity to read this book before my political career. One, it very much makes clear that the gendered treatment doesn't leave you, no matter what title you've got. And in the book, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf talks about even when she is president of Liberia, going to meetings of the African Union with other presidents and still feeling like if she doesn't give a good speech and get every fact in the speech right, she will be counted down, that a test is being set for her. And if she speaks cogently and authoritatively, then people will head nod and thinks, yes, she's passed the test. But even at that level, when your title is president, there's still these gendered differential treatments. I think that would have been good to know before I started on this journey. And then the other thing I think would have been good to know, and it's a reflection actually I bring to the book, I've thought about it a lot since I've left politics. When I was first in Parliament, so a young politician, a backbencher, I just didn't have the same sense as the young male politicians about how much space you could take up in the world. You know, I sort of had this very practical can do, you know, you got your work done, you met with people if you needed to work something out, they were busy, you were busy, you didn't have unnecessary meetings, only to see that the young male politicians were taking themselves off to meet the CEOs of Australia's biggest companies, or the chairs of the boards of directors, or the CEOs of big media companies, or the editors of newspapers. And they just had this inherent confidence that if they asked for an appointment, they would get one, and they were entitled to take up that much space in the diaries of leading Australians. And I would want to transmit that lesson to younger women. Don't underestimate how much space you're entitled to take up in the world, and consequently how you can build connections and networks that will stand you in good stead later on.
Really fantastic points. Thank you. So our first audience question is from Radhika Chela, who's a student at King's College. And she says, how do women at early stages of their career prepare for bigger leadership roles? What tools, resources, insights should we equip ourselves with? I think you've given us one insight there already, Julia, but any others that you two would briefly like to share with Radhika?
Maybe one important thing is that we are not asking in this book, we don't ask or expect women to change who they are. So as you go up the ladder, be confident in who you are. Be confident in your style. If you need to change it, fine, but you're not changing it because, you know, someone else is thinking you should change it. So a good lesson is to be confident in yourself and be who you are, because you perform best when that is the case.
I absolutely agree with that. I think what we end up saying in the book, we do outline what we call standout lessons, and they're there for young women who are aspiring, they're there for men, they're there for media companies. We share as many insights as we can, but we do, with all of the standout lessons for young women, say, look, here is a set of issues we think you may end up confronting during your career. There's no right answer as to how to deal with them, but think about them in advance so that you're not caught in a moment, not sure what to do next, that you've actually war gamed it through. We use the phrase, be aware, not beware, because we want women to go for leadership. We don't want women to decide that it's not for them, but be aware that you're likely to strike these gendered moments, and perhaps, you know, with your closest colleagues, with your best friends, even war game in advance, how you will react so that it's easier to deal with that moment than if you're simply blindsided.
And I want to add one quick thing to that. I think after reading this book, one of the things that we want women or men to get out of it is that don't think you're the only one having this experience. You know, it's not unique. Even top women leaders have had these experiences, and that it's comforting to know that this just doesn't happen to me. There's something wrong with me while I'm having this experience. No, other people have had them and will have them, and just the comfort of knowing that, I think, helps a lot.
So I've got a question directly just in from an audience member, Matasipo Mosaka, and she says, do you think mentorship from men to women would help break stereotypical thinking that women are not tailored for leadership?
Well, I mean, let me jump into that. I think, you know, I commented on this before, that, you know, women shouldn't just rely on other women for mentorship, but also on men. I'm not sure that it follows directly that mentorship from men, you know, will break that stereotype that women are not meant for leadership. I think you need much more than that. But it does help if we have men in our universe. But be aware that it's not just, there are also other women who may think women are not ready for leadership. So this is a battle, not just for men, but also for some of us women who have that kind of reflection and may be in the way. So, but to be fit for leadership, I want to say one thing. You're not fit for leadership because other people think you are. You're fit for leadership because inside you, you have the confidence. You know what it takes. You stand your ground. That's what's going to make you a leader. You have your style. It's not what other people think. It's what you have inside of you that makes you a leader.
I'm just going to agree with all of that. I think it's, you know, what ultimately carries you through is having that sort of sense of purpose about why you want to lead, what you're trying to achieve, what it matters for, and that's very steadying. So I agree, absolutely. I don't think it's simply the mentorship that breaks it down, but we live in a world where disproportionately power positions are still held by men. So if they're not part of the solution, then we're not going to get to where we need to go. And one way they can be part of the solution is being involved as mentors and, or sponsors of women on their leadership journeys.
I've got two related questions. So they feed into the conversation we've just been having. So I'm going to bring them together, I think. The first one is from Mai Tinjap Payanod. Now, I'm so sorry, Mai, if I've mispronounced that terribly. But she asks, how can women, especially women from ethnic minority backgrounds, overcome negative stereotypes and lead? And then we have a question from James Thomas, who says, as a white male leader, what would you recommend as the top or 3 actions we could take to be better advocates for women's leadership? So perhaps we can pull those together.
Well, maybe I can start on the ethnic minority. Being a woman of color myself and an African woman and standing out in a crowd, I'm not exactly hiding who I am. In my life, I've always been out front. And it's really quite tough. And I talk about it in one part of the book. I say that in the power structure, you know, you've got white men first, then Black men, and white women, and then, it's white men first, yes, Black men, white women, then Black women. You know, so, you know, ethnic minorities, colored people, you know, sometimes have a much tougher time of it than other women. And, you know, I don't go into it, Julia doesn't go into it, we don't go into it too much. I think that's for another book. But I think that the way to handle this, some people handle it by trying to fit in, either in their appearance, the way they talk, how they fit into the culture of the place. If that works for you, fine. But I think that, you know, when you get into a situation in which your ethnic minority status or your look is the issue, don't necessarily feel compelled to blend in. Not blending in has worked for me. I just decided this is who I am. They've got to take it. And I have to find ways to make them accept me as I am within this crowd. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's far easier to be yourself than to try and fit in some other way.
I'm happy to take the question about what white men can do. We have a section in the book about what men can do. And so if I was going to summarize that, number 1, think about how much you talk, because the research shows that if you've got 5 people in a meeting, it's only when 4 of those 5 people are women that women will get a fair share of the talking time. Or put another way, if there's more than one man, then men will disproportionately take the talking time. So every man can make a contribution to making sure that there is a fair distribution of talking time. And obviously in politics, in business, in so many settings, talking time equals decision-making say, so it matters. Second, men can have real impact if they are prepared to call out sexism. And in fact, the research shows that if a man calls out a sexist incident, he is more likely to be believed and the matter taken seriously than if a woman does it, because he is seen to not have any inherent conflict of interest in doing it. And so people just accept what he's saying and are therefore more prepared to act on it. So men calling out sexist incidents can make a real difference to culture. And then if you are a man who's got sufficient power in your workplace, your organisation, to change the structures and the culture of it, really do take a very deep dive into what in your organisation is holding women back. Of the work we do at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership that Rosie and the team do so well, we do work with organisations to help them understand what are the unique barriers in their organisation to women coming through and what are the best strategies for clearing them out of the way. So don't just think you know. Getting gender right is complicated. There's good evidence, and make sure that you're getting that evidence so that you can be really efficient and impactful in getting rid of the many barriers that hold women back.
Thank you both. And another question that's just come in, I think is advice we could probably all benefit from, is do you have any tips on how to constructively help people who cannot see gender inequality so they can begin to see their privilege in a way that doesn't provoke a defensive response? And that's from Claire Cullen, Oxford University.
I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, that's a very tough one. You know, it's not only about gender inequality, it's also about race. You know, I think one of the things that strikes is that it's very difficult for people to relate to what you're talking about when they've never been in that situation, cannot even imagine. So for instance, let me just use it on race because it's so startling. A Black person walks into a room and what people see is your Blackness, and it colors the way they react to you. Even when they're the best meaning person in the world, it colors the way they receive you. If you're with a group of people, it's happened to me a lot of times, they just can't conceive that you're the leader of this group. When I've led a team of men and I'm out there, and it happens in all cultures, you know, they see a Black woman and that cannot possibly be the image, you know, so they can't relate to it. The same with gender. You know, people are well-meaning, you know, and they just don't see those aspects of gender inequality that women have to live with. And I think that the only way, you know, you can try to change some of this around, and it's not easy, is for me, evidence-based. Talking about it to them doesn't work because they just think you're making them feel bad and you want them to be politically correct. But when confronted with evidence, such as some of what we have in the book, women are not systematically unable to lead. So why is it that the evidence shows that women have so few power positions in the world, in whatever sphere of life you think about? I think we've got to put evidence in front of people on gender inequality and what it has led to. And that is when people, when they see objective information that makes sense to them, that's how you begin to break it.
I agree with that. That's a terrific answer. Just one little thing that I would add, and I think this is, you know, just one of those thought experiments that can get people talking and reflecting. We talk in the book, and I, in doing interviews for the book, have been raising this with journalists and just inviting them to look at the publication that they work for and to pick out paragraphs that are about women and to strike out the woman's name in their head and just insert a male generic name, whatever the appropriate male generic is for the culture and context they're working in. But let's just say, you know, John or Ben or something like that for the purpose of this discussion. And almost every journalist I've talked to has actually said to me, yep, you know, I can see that in our newspaper we had a story about, you know, one journalist said to me, in our newspaper on the weekend, we had a profile piece about a woman where we talked about the lines on her face which showed under the makeup, something that they obviously never would have written about a man. And so just that little thought experiment has helped get the conversation going to hopefully get that gendered bit out of the journalism. So I think that that can be a useful little device.
Well, good tips from you both. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to finish with one question specifically targeted at you each. I have one from Claire Ireland, who's the Australian High Commissioner for Nigeria. And she says, are there any lessons and reflections from your own time in politics here in Nigeria that you would give to the next generation of young girls as they possibly contemplate a career in politics in Nigeria?
Well, I think from my own experience is get ready for a rough ride. I think we still have a long way to go in my country, you know, for women to be comfortable feelings and approaches in politics. There's so few. I don't want to quote you the numbers with respect to the percentage in parliament and so on. We've done better with female cabinet members. During the time I was in office, we actually went from 16% in one cabinet I was in to more than double that, 33% or 36% in the last cabinet I was in. And the women were given very impactful portfolios: finance, aviation, defense, education, the portfolios that mattered. But it's not, my lesson is that you have to have a very thick skin. Be very conscious of why you're going into politics or why you're going in to serve. There was something Julia said earlier, which served me very well. Purpose. When you go into politics, have a purpose, because you're going to have so many pitfalls and stumblings along the way. But if you keep your eyes straight on the purpose, which is to serve your nation, to deliver, to make a difference in people's lives, to use the gift you have to serve many more people, I think that will help you get through.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. And Julia, bear with me. This is probably not something you'd normally hear me say. This is from Nina Diala Parker, who's a policy officer at Harrow Council. And she says, Julia, did you feel as badass watching your speech back as you did making it? Your speech made me feel confident to defend all women at work.
Well, I actually don't spend time watching myself back. I think when you've done it and you've lived through it, kind of from my point of view, that's enough. But I am happy that speech is still resonating for women. I know that it's had a fair old outing in the United Kingdom over recent days, that it's still resonating for women. And I'm particularly delighted that it's resonating for young women and resonating for them in the sense of almost a battle anthem to help take them out into a world that they still know is gendered, but one that they're very impatient to change. And I love that sense of impatience, that they want to get this done and that they're very feisty about the demands that they're going to make on the world. I think that speaks volumes and makes me very optimistic about where we're going to get to next.
That's very heartening, and I think we can all feel optimistic about this next generation of young women. Before we close, can I ask the two of you, was there anything any final remarks, anything I haven't asked that you would like to have raised? Anything you want to share with our audience?
From me, I'm very much looking forward to getting back to London at some point. to be back with the team at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. And I do hope that people enjoy the book. Actually, in the UK, Rosie's holding up the Australian edition. In the UK, it's actually got a red cover, so please look out for the red cover. But I hope that many of the friends who have joined us from the UK on this webinar tonight that I can see in person when I do get back, and it'll be a real delight to be back with the team. So we've managed to keep all of our work and research going, but being together again would just be lovely.
Wonderful.
Well, for me, I think what I want to leave people with is that I hope from this book, they end up getting encouraged to lead. We alluded to it before. That's certainly the spirit in which it was written, that when women finish reading it, they know that they are not alone, that their experiences are not strange, that it's not because they did something, that whatever is happening to them is happening. And above all, that they get through it all and decide to lead. Because, you know, leadership is also a decision. You also have to decide to take the mantle. And that is, it's not always easy. So we want people, when they read this book, to have all the encouragement and all the laughs. I certainly hope there are a lot of laughs there too as they read, and say, yeah, I can make it. I'll be a leader. Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much, and particularly in Ngotsi, when it's such a busy time for you, and we wish you the best of luck with everything that you have going on at the moment. And thank you both so much, and for giving us this book as well as for your time. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
Julia.
Bye-bye.